Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our raucous reading of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. We are reading the book and chitty-chatting about it, and we're up to chapter 49 in this battered old Penguin trade paperback that is certainly not going to survive this event, and I'm not sure that it would want to. What a way to go. And as we have seen in the last couple of chapters, all of the major action of what's happening in the book, what's actually happening in the book, is now happening off stage. Once upon a time, we had a toehold in that action with the father of our main character, Mr. Bennet, in the city in order to look for his daughter Lydia and the man with whom she appears to have eloped, the nefarious Mr. Wickham. Mr. Bennet went precipitously looking to track them down, figure out where they are. But Mr. Gardiner, his brother-in-law, has decided he goes to London too, and he's a far more capable man of the world. And he convinces Mr. Bennet to come home, to go home to Longbourn, comfort his family, and wait for news. So we are now all in the same position that the Bennet women were just a chapter ago. We are now all waiting for news from London. That's all that we can do. And that's how this chapter starts. 2 days after Mr. Bennet's return, as Jane and Elizabeth were walking together in the shrubbery behind the house, they saw the housekeeper coming towards them, and, concluding that she came to call them to their mother, went forward to meet her. But instead of the expected summons, when they approached her, she said to Miss Bennet, that is Jane Bennet, the eldest, "I beg your pardon, madam, for interrupting you, but I was in hopes you might have got some good news from town, so I took the liberty of coming to ask." "What do you mean, Hill? We have heard nothing from town." "Dear madam," cried Mrs. Hill in great astonishment, "don't you know there is an express come from master, from Mr. Gardiner? He's been here half an hour, and master has had a letter." They call Mr. Bennet master. But they do seem a little bit congenial. There are plenty of landed houses in England where the housekeeper would not have had the moxie to come and ask, to intrude into family business. Away ran the girls, too eager to get in to have time for speech. They ran through the vestibule into the breakfast room, from thence to the library. Their father was in neither, and they were on the point of seeking him upstairs with their mother when they were met by the butler, who said, "If you are looking for my master, ma'am, he is walking towards the little copse." Upon this, that is COPSE. It's a small stand of trees. It is not the Boston pronunciation of a dead body. Okay, just so you know. Upon this information, they instantly passed through the hall once more and ran across the lawn after their father, who was deliberately pursuing his way towards a small wood on one side of the paddock. Jane, who was not so light nor so much in the habit of running as Elizabeth, soon lagged behind, while her sister, panting for breath, came up with him and eagerly cried out, "Oh, Papa, what news? What news? Have you heard from my uncle?" "Yes, I have. I had a letter from him by express." "Well, and what news does it bring, good or bad?" What is there of good to be expected?" said he, taking the letter from his pocket. "But perhaps you would like to read it." Elizabeth impatiently caught it from his hand. Now Jane came up. "Read it aloud," said their father, "for I hardly know myself what it is about." And it is a letter from Gracechurch Street from Mr. Gardiner, which reads like this. "At last I am able to send you some tidings of my niece, and such as, upon the whole, I hope will give you satisfaction. Soon after you left me on Saturday, I was fortunate enough to find out in what part of London they were. The particulars I reserve till we meet. It is enough to know that they are discovered. I have seen them both." "Then it is as I always hoped," cried Jane. "They are married." Elizabeth read on. "I have seen them both. They are not married, nor can I find there was ever any intention of being so. But if you are willing to perform the engagements which I have ventured to make on your side, I hope it will not be long before they are. All that is required of you to assure to your daughter by settlement her equal share in the £5,000 secured upon your children after the decease of you, yourself, and my sister, and moreover to enter into an arrangement for allowing her during your life £100 per annum. These are conditions which, considering everything, I have had no hesitation in complying with, as far as I thought myself privileged for you. I shall send them by express, that no time may be lost in bringing me your answer. You will easily comprehend from these particulars that Mr. Wickham's circumstances are not so hopeless as they are generally believed to be. The world has been deceived in that respect, and I am happy to say there will be some little money, even when all his debts are discharged, to settle on my niece, in addition to her own fortune. If, as I conclude will be the case, you send me full power to act in your name throughout the whole of this business, I will immediately give directions to Haggerston to preparing a proper settlement. There will not be the smallest occasion for your coming to town again. Therefore, stay quietly at Longbourn, and depend on my diligence and care. Send back your answer as soon as you can, and be careful to write explicitly. We have judged it best that my niece should be married from this house, of which I hope you will approve. She comes to us today. I shall write again as soon as anything more is determined on. Yours, etc. Okay, we now have news. Mr. Gardiner has found Lydia, and she has found Wickham, and a deal has been struck. We've been told over and over again that Lydia has no money. That's true. But money is settled on her at the death of her parents. If Mr. Bennet is willing to vouchsafe that money and also an income for her, £100 a year, then the deal can be made. A deal can be made to get her and Wickham married. The unspoken subtext here is that Wickham is demanding terms and doesn't want to marry a wife who is completely penniless. Now, the reason why Mr. Gardiner says that they think they've been deceived on the part of Wickham's income, well, he might have a reason of his own, but the reason why we would think that as readers is because no man can live in a respectable way on £100 a year that is provided to him by his wife. It's got to be that Wickham has a money of his own, some money of his own. And all that Mr. Gardiner needs to make any of this happen is Mr. Bennet's permission before he gets the people at Haggerston to start working out the details in legal documents and financial sums. Is it possible, cried Elizabeth when she had finished, can it be possible that he will marry her? Mr. Wickham is not so undeserving, then, as we have thought, said her sister. My dear father, I congratulate you. And have you answered the letter? Said Elizabeth. No, but it must be done soon. Most earnestly did she entreat him to lose no more time before he wrote. Oh, my dear father, she cried, come back and write immediately. Consider how important every moment is in such a case. Let me write for you, said Jane, if you dislike the trouble yourself. I dislike it very much, he replied, but it must be done. And so saying, he turned back with them and walked towards the house. And may I ask, said Elizabeth, but the terms, I suppose, must be complied with? Complied with? I'm only ashamed of his asking so little. And they must marry? Yet he is such a man. Yes, they must marry. There is nothing else to be done. But there are two things that I want very much to know. One is how much money your uncle has laid down to bring it about, and the other, how I'm ever to repay him. Because the obvious inference here is not only that maybe Mr. Gardiner or somebody is supplying monetary wants on the other side of that measly £100 a year, but also that somebody has dealt with all of these debts that we've been hearing about. That Wickham is leaving debts behind him wherever he goes. Mr. Bennet is assuming that this is all Mr. Gardiner, who is just laying out this money. He's a prosperous businessman. He's just laying out this money to make this scandal go away, as much as it can be. Thanks to Mr. Collins and his ilk, probably the Lucases as well. The scandal is all over the country. But to detooth it, to make it go away as much as possible, they have to marry respectably. And Mr. Gardiner knows that. Mr. Bennet is assuming that he is now in Mr. Gardiner's financial debt. Money, my uncle, cried Jane. What do you mean, sir? Oh, Jane, don't ever change. I mean that no man in his senses would marry Lydia on so slight a temptation as 100 a year during my life and 50 after I am gone. That is very true, said Elizabeth, though it had not occurred to me before. His debts must be discharged, and something still remain. Oh, it must be my uncle's doings. Generous, good man, I am afraid he has distressed himself. A small sum could not do all this. No, said her father, Wickham's a fool if he takes her with a farthing less than £10,000. I should be very sorry to think so ill of him in the beginning of our relationship. £10,000! Heaven forbid! How is half such a sum to be repaid? Mr. Bennet made no answer, and each of them, deep in thought, continued silent till they reached the house. Their father then went to the library to write, and the girls walked into the breakfast room. And they are really to be married, cried Elizabeth, as soon as they were by themselves. How strange it is. And for this we are to be thankful? That they should marry, small as is their chance of happiness, and wretched as is his character? We are forced to rejoice? Oh, Lydia! I comfort myself in thinking, replied Jane, that he certainly would not marry Lydia if he had not a real regard for her. Oh, though our kind uncle has done something towards clearing him, I cannot believe that £10,000 or anything like it has been advanced. He has children of his own and may have more. How could he spare half £10,000? If we are ever to learn what Wickham's debts have been, said Elizabeth, and how much is settled on his side on our sister, we shall exactly know what Mr. Gardiner has done for them, because Wickham has not sixpence to his name. The kindness of my uncle and aunt can never be requited. Their taking her home and affording her their personal protection and countenance is such a sacrifice to her advantage as years of gratitude cannot enough acknowledge. By this time she's actually with them. If such goodness does not make her miserable, now she will never deserve to be happy. What a meeting for her when she first sees my aunt. We must endeavor to forget all that has passed on either side, said Jane. I hope and trust they will yet be happy. His consenting to marry her is a proof, I will believe, that he has come to a right way of thinking. Didn't hear the part about bargaining, did you, Jane? Their mutual affection will steady them, and I flatter myself they will settle so quietly and live in so rational a manner as may in time make their past imprudence forgotten. Oh, Jane. Their conduct has been such, replied Elizabeth, as neither you nor I nor anybody can ever forget. It is useless to talk of it. It now occurred to the girls that their mother was in all likelihood perfectly ignorant of what had happened, since their father wouldn't tell her. They went to the library, therefore, and asked for their father, whether he would not wish them to make it known to her. He was writing, and without raising his head, coolly replied, Just as you please. May we take my uncle's letter to read to her? Take it, take whatever you like, and get away. Elizabeth took the letter with her from his writing table, and they went upstairs together. Mary and Kitty were both with Mrs. Bennet. One communication would therefore do for all. After a slight preparation of good news, the letter was read aloud. Mrs. Bennet could hardly contain herself. As soon as Jane had read Mr. Gardiner's hope of Lydia's being soon married, her joy burst forth, and every following sentence added to its exuberance. She was now in an irritation as violent from delight as she had been fidgety from alarm and vexation. To know that her daughter would soon be married was enough. She was disturbed by no fear for her felicity, nor humbled by any remembrance of her misconduct. My dear, dear Lydia, she cried, this is delightful indeed. She will be married. I shall see her again. She will be married at 16. My kind, good brother, I knew how it would be. I knew he would manage everything. How I long to see her, and to see dear Wickham, too. But the clothes, the wedding clothes, I will write to my sister Gardiner about them directly. Lizzie, my dear, run down to your father and ask him how much he will give her. Stay, I will go myself. Ring the bell, Kitty, for Hill. I will put on my things in a moment. My dear, dear Lydia, how merry we shall all be when we meet. Her eldest daughter endeavored to give her some relief to the violence of these transports by leading her thoughts to the obligations which Mr. Gardiner's behavior had laid them all under. She's just brushing that off. For we must attribute this happy conclusion, she added, in a great measure to his kindness. We are persuaded that he has pledged himself to assist Mr. Wickham with money. And here I have been a big defender of Mrs. Bennet. I've been a much bigger defender of her than I have been of Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins I write off after that letter that he wrote in the last chapter. And there's something about her response to this reminder on Jane's part that kind of makes me want to write her off too, as not being just a vain, empty-headed, silly, but good-natured woman, but a bit of a monster, a bit of a sponge. She says, well, cried her mother, it is all very right. Who should do it but her own uncle? If he had not had a family of his own, I and my children must have had all his money, you know, and it is the first time we've ever had anything from him except a few presents. Well, I am so happy. In a short time I shall have a daughter married. Mrs. Wickham, how well it sounds, and she was only 16 last June. My dear Jane, I am in such a flutter that I am sure I can't write, so I will dictate, and you will write for me. We will settle your father about the money afterwards, but the things should be ordered immediately. She was then proceeding to all the particulars of calico, muslin, and cambric, and would shortly have dictated some very plentiful orders had not Jane, though with some difficulty, persuaded her to wait till her father was at leisure to be consulted. One day's delay, she observed, would be of small importance, and her mother was too happy to be quite so obstinate as usual. Other schemes came into her head. They're asking her to wait before writing out orders for a large amount of expenditure, because, for all they know, her father intends to give Lydia nothing and spend nothing. I will go to Meryton, said she, as soon as I am dressed, and tell the good news to my sister Phillips, and as I come back, I can call on Lady Lucas and Mrs. Long. Kitty, run down and order the carriage. An airing will do me a great deal of good, I am sure. Girls, can I do anything for you in Meryton? Oh, here comes Hill. My dear Hill, have you heard the good news? Miss Lydia is going to be married, and you shall all have a bowl of punch to make merry at her wedding. Mrs. Hill began instantly to express her joy. Elizabeth received her congratulations amongst the rest, and then, sick of this folly, took refuge in her own room, that she might think with freedom. This is not a happy occasion, in any way. It's only Mrs. Bennet that sees it that way. Poor Lydia's situation must be, at best, be bad enough, but that it was no worse, she had need to be thankful. She felt it so, and though in looking forward, neither rational happiness nor worldly prosperity could be justly expected for her sister, in looking back to what they had feared only 2 hours ago, she felt all the advantages of what they had gained. Okay, so quiet reflection tells Elizabeth that, okay, this is really, really bad. Wickham doesn't love her. She's an idiot. She's no more capable of loving him than she is of loving anything. There's no money. This is extremely ill-omened. The whole of the county is already abuzz with the scandal of them running off first. None of this was done with propriety. All of it reflects poorly on the family. They almost certainly will be unhappy and poor. But, she tells herself in her room, but at least it's not as bad as we thought it was this morning. At least they're not missing or intent on some sort of disreputable life or something like that. They can be brought to reason. If not right, then reason. That's something. So, that's where things stand now. But I think you can... I think you can tell from that letter from Mr. Gardiner that there's a lot he's not saying. Right? There's a lot that he's not saying. They have to intuit how much money is being spent. The recipients of the letter have to intuit that from the minor stipulations that Mr. Gardiner lays out. And also, how does he find them? And how is it done so easily as soon as Mr. Bennet leaves town? And all the intricacies of the arrangement itself. He doesn't say anything about what either one of them said or did. All that is left out of his letter. His letter is sent in haste, but I think also in diplomacy, and we have plenty still to be curious about. So we'll wrap this up for now as we barrel towards the ending. Believe it or not, we are getting to the ending of Pride and Prejudice. What are we going to read next? No idea. I'll wrap this up, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.